Kate Winkler Dawson.
And I'm Paul Holes.
This is Buried Bones. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Kate, how are you?
I'm well. It has been months since we have been on our Virgin cruise, the crime voyage, and I'm still thinking about it. I was thinking the other day, why am I not in the Dominican Republic with a pina colada right now? I don't understand.
Is that what you were drinking, were pina coladas? I'm not sure I ever saw you with one in your hand. Are you kidding me?
Be quiet, Paul. I had a cider. They were sweet, and they bought me a cider, which was really good.
Okay, the one cider for the entire trip.
We had a great time, and this was an experience you and I have never had before. We've never done a live show, ever. What a time to present one of the most awful cases that's also sort of complicated and a case that you weren't particularly familiar with, like Black Dahlia, in front of this big audience on a moving ship. I mean, what could go wrong?
No, well, I think the live event, I mean, we were, sitting on stage, and of course, people are watching us. You had two computers in front of you. Mm-hmm. I had a computer in front of me. We had screens behind us. So it was definitely, the challenge was trying to keep everything sort of straight. So it was actually something that was consumable, both from a visual and an audio standpoint.
Yeah. I loved the energy of the audience. I had not expected that before. I know you've done a lot of live stuff, as have I with CrimeCon. It's just different when you're presenting this information and, they haven't heard it, and to kind of hear the people kind of going, oh, when you hear sad things or people clapping or laughing every once in a while if we crack a joke at the appropriate time. So it was really kind of a big difference for me. I want to do more of those shows. I think it was great.
Yeah, no, I really do enjoy the live events, the live episodes, just because, like what you said, there is an energy, and so interacting with the audience in real time, it's almost like, when I testify, I'll look at the jury, and if I see jurors starting to nod as I'm talking, it's like, okay, I'm relating with them. Mm-hmm. So up on stage, when we're doing Black Dahlia, seeing out to the audience and how the audience was responding to us, it's like, yes, they're actually enjoying this, and they're consuming the information. They're absorbing it.
Yeah. And it's such an important story. So for anybody who's listening or watching, if you have not gone back around the Halloween time to listen to or watch our bonus episode about Black Dahlia, you really should, because it's a hell of a case. And I thought Paul did a fantastic job. And I get constant messages from people saying, I have heard this case thousands of times. I've watched documentaries on it. I've never heard some of the stuff that Paul talked about. And that's the goal. We're taking old cases and taking a fresh look. That's the whole thing.
Right. And that's where, like with Black Dahlia, because of course I had heard sort of the mythology in terms of the various types of investigative theories. But I don't think you had somebody previously that has my background take a look at what happened to her. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, which was so helpful, was the actual photos. I mean, really good photos of her at the crime scene that I could interpret. And it was stunning how different, what my thoughts were versus what, everybody else's investigative theories were. And, it's sort of like, well, I've worked these types of cases. Mm-hmm. This is where it's like, I know what's going on here. And I felt that I, came to the right conclusions, and hopefully, people who are wanting to listen to it in the future will understand, that, okay, I am at least bringing a level of insight that I don't think has been brought onto that case before.
And I think what's so great about what you do is if somebody who doesn't understand things as a professional investigator, they'll take a piece of evidence and misinterpret it. And when that happens, just like if you're an inexperienced, person in law enforcement, and you have a case, and if you misinterpret one piece of evidence, it shoots you down a road that is not the right road. And it sounds like that has kind of happened in this case somewhat, but we don't have answers. And that's one of the big problems. We don't know if you're right. It'd be great to know, but we don't know.
Sure. And that's just been my experience. Law enforcement, when it's the unusual, and when you're dealing with, let's say, a predator, and a predator that's a stranger to the victim, most law enforcement has never worked that type of case, and they don't understand some of the paraphilias, some of the really deviant behaviors that these predators have. And so they try to take a case and fit it into something what they know, what they've experienced before. And that's where, in Black Dahlia, having worked predatory cases, I'm saying, oh, hold on, I'm seeing exactly what's going on. I know what she went through. And it's a horrific case when you really get down to the details of what happened to her.
Okay, so we've talked about how wonderful the cruise was, and I think a lot of people responded to Black Dahlia because it is this legendary, really disturbing, really just thought-provoking case. So this is the case that I'm getting ready to present to you is one of those cases too. It's a well-known case. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before. I'm not going to tell you the name of it yet, but it's a complicated case. But I want to warn people from the beginning that this is about sexual assault, and it does involve sexual assault and murder of children. So, kind of going into this is already a very difficult case, but this is one of those big cases that I've had a lot of people ask for your opinion about. So don't mess it up, okay?
I'll try not, Kate.
Okay, let's set the scene. This is where we are. We're in Villisca, Iowa, and this is a small but prosperous town of about 2,500 people, and this is 1912. This is before Prohibition, before the Great Depression, before all of that. And so this is just a sleepy town, but, a town that has some money. And we're going to be talking about one particular family. Any thoughts on Iowa? I've never been. I heard it's just amazing.
Do you know whereabouts in Iowa? Is it more towards the east or the west?
It looks like it's about southwest of Des Moines, north of Kansas City. Just kind of south of Omaha, Nebraska, too.
Yes, I've actually I did a case for my TV show in Williamsburg, Iowa, which was closer to Cedar Rapids, and then had to drive from there around Des Moines and then south down to Kansas City, as there was a connection in that case between those two jurisdictions. And so I've actually driven at least through the part of the state where this Villisca is at.
Okay, well, there you go. Already we're a step ahead.
Yes.
Okay, so this was a really weird morning for some folks in the town. It's about 7:30 in the morning, and it is Monday, June 10th, as I said, 1912. So there is a woman who's been up for kind of a long time. Her name is Mary Peckham, and she has some very affluent neighbors. They're called the Moores, the Moore family. And she says that at 7:30 in the morning on a Monday, that house would have been buzzing because, you've got people who are doing chores, you've got the kids doing chores, and, the father would have gotten up. There just would have been a lot of people around because they have 4 kids. And they are 11 and 10 and 7 and 5. 3 boys and a girl. And they are loud. As you know, we both have had children that age. So she's alarmed. She's very alarmed that nothing is happening at that house. It shouldn't be quiet. And also that the shades are drawn. And I know that that's one of those important things where your neighbors really well. If there's been a strange car parked in the driveway for a long time, that maybe something happened. We've talked about the family who left the laundry out and it got soaked in the water and the rain, and that's how people knew something was wrong. So Mary Peckham thinks something's wrong at the Moore house because the shades are drawn and there's nothing happening.
Now, is this like a farm town or like ranches? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Mary's house is a distance away from the Moore's house?
Well, so let me go back and look real quick, Paul, at this guy, because this is, they have neighbors, but it looks like Mary is close enough so that she's able to see the shades are drawn at the house. Yeah. And this is not a particularly large house. I'll show you a little bit about it in a minute. But this is not, 3 acres away. They're fairly close. Okay. So she's able to make some observations. And obviously she can hear that nothing's happening with all those kids. So she goes to the farmhouse. She knocks on the door. There's no answer. So she contacts the Moore's relative, who's a guy named Ross Moore. And he gets there about, it looks like 45 minutes later. And he taps on the window. He unlocks the west parlor door and he enters. And the house is totally dark. So you've got a mother and a father and 4 kids in this house. And the house is dark. Not only are the blinds drawn, but the front door's glass is covered by a black skirt that's been ripped in half. So kind of like my cottage, everything's blacked out. You can't see anything that's happening inside from the outside.
Yep.
He makes his way to the ground floor guest bedroom. So this house looks about 2 stories, 2-story white farmhouse. And on the first floor, there's a guest bedroom. He goes there. He sees 2 small figures covered in blood-soaked bed sheets and pillows. And he assumes it's 2 kids. So he doesn't even go upstairs, which is probably the right decision, I would guess.
Well, at least from a preservation of a crime scene, it's just, what is actually going on at that moment as he's going through the house? Are people actively being hurt? Or is there an offender that's still in there? But we can't expect Ross, to take that type of responsibility on.
I was thinking more of a Ross not getting killed kind of point of view.
Yes.
I'm not sure I'd go upstairs either. Okay. Ross leaves. He calls the police. It's a guy named Henry who goes by Hank Horton. And he is the marshal of Villisca, but he doesn't have a lot of training here. So he gets here at 8:30, same time as another relative came. So the Moores are kind of all over this town of Villisca, it sounds like. They go into the guest bedroom. That's where Ross points him. And Hank uncovers 2 figures. And they are 2 little girls, 8-year-old Ina Mae Stillinger and 12-year-old Lena Gertrude Stillinger. And you'll notice that they are not named Moore. These are sleepover visitors.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you said the Moores had 4 kids, 3 boys and 1 girl.
Right. So this is unfortunate. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So they were brutally bludgeoned. And, these were, as I said, family friends who wanted to spend the night. And so the Moores said, yes, they are dead. And I have details. So this is where we come to forks in the road on this show all the time. I have details on more murders. I also have details on the specific injuries about these 2 little girls who are not Moores. So where do you want to head next?
Why don't we kind of walk through the crime scene first, and then we can go back and revisit what happened to each of the victims.
Okay. I'm going to skip over the observations of the guest room and where the 2 little girls were, and we'll come back to that. It sounds like the only bedroom on the ground floor is this one guest room. So they go upstairs. Every mirror in the house is covered with a blanket or an apron or a skirt or some other garment.
Oh, now that's significant.
And I have photos of that. So,
okay.
And then we can keep going. So don't forget about the photos of that. I have a lot of photos in this case.
Okay. Oh, good.
In the main bedroom where the parents would be, there is blood that it has been splattered across the headboard and onto the wall. It soaks the clothes that cover the faces of the parents. The father is 43-year-old Josiah Joe Moore, and then his 39-year-old wife is Sarah Moore. They're laying side by side, and they appear to have been sleeping peacefully when they were attacked. And Sarah is still wearing her gold wedding band. But both of their faces are completely obliterated is, I think, what Hank has said, the investigator. Joe's face was beaten so brutally with the blunt side of an axe, they say, that his face and his eyes were no more than pulp. His brain matter is scooped out. That's how they found it. Sarah's face has been hacked with this sharp edge of an axe. And it is reducing it to approximately 1-inch slices. Slivers of their skulls, which are about 2 or 3 inches long, are scattered throughout the bed. Such brutality, they think, was resulted in about 20 to 30 blows per person. It sounds like it was that the brain was spilling out of the skull. And I don't see a note of there being some sort of weird thing that happened. So I do know that Josiah received the most blows out of everybody.
Okay. And he's also, the adult male inside the house. He's the biggest threat, but also is he, because due to the volume of blows, does that indicate that maybe he was more of the intended target, that the offender had greater angst against Josiah than the other family members? So we'll see how this develops. I just want to clarify, I think you said that their heads were covered with clothing, and that was both Josiah and Sarah's heads.
Let me see. So, clothes that cover their face. You're right. Yep.
Okay. All right. That's another significant behavioral aspect. There's potentially, and this is also taking a look at the crime scene. Sometimes you could see where there's what I would refer to as a spatter guard that offenders can use. Mm-hmm. They're recognizing, all of a sudden they've got a lot of blood and brain matter that's going all over the place. And so they'll put this guard, the spatter guard, in place as they inflict more blows. Mm-hmm. But if it's occurring after they kill both Josiah and Sarah, then that's behaviorally very significant. That indicates that, the offender is potentially has a closer relationship to the victims than what a stranger would, and or is not accepting what his actions have been. And he's trying to, in essence, block the sight of the victims and what he did to the victims.
Okay. Well, let's keep moving along here. We're going to stay in the main bedroom with Josiah and Sarah. The investigators look to the top of the ceiling, and this is 7 feet 4 inches above the floor. Okay, that's how tall the ceiling is. There are slashes in the wallpaper made by the upswing of an axe. Plaster from the ceiling powders the bed and the floor. One of Sarah's shoes is on its side near the bed, and blood that had filled the shoe has poured onto the floor. And there's more blood that speckles the shoe's sole. So bloody, bloody scene. What does that mean? Is he standing on the bed and the axe is literally hitting the ceiling as he's bludgeoning them?
I wouldn't say, right now I can't say where the offender is at relative to the victims when he's inflicting the blows, but a 7'4" ceiling is a very low ceiling. And you think about the length of an axe, and if you have, an average height person, male or female, if you're going to swing, if you're holding the axe towards the end of the handle like axes typically are used, and you swing that axe up in order to strike a blow, you're going to hit the ceiling. You're going to hit an 8-foot ceiling. Typically to use such a long weapon inside an average height rooms with average ceiling height, you have to choke up on the handle of the axe, or you have to swing it at a diagonal to prevent hitting the ceiling. But it also sounds that the axe is also striking the wall and is damaging the wallpaper. And I imagine, you haven't said where that is. Is that above the headboard? If it's above the headboard, then this is now putting the offender potentially up onto the bed or right off to the side of the bed, and with a side, more of a diagonal type swing is now striking the wall. So there's different ways that could occur, and that's all part of the, with photos, I might be able to interpret.
Well, I'll tell you something that's interesting. At the farmhouse that my parents owned, that was from 1890. One thing that always shocked me about it, that it was hard to get used to for some reason, is there was wallpaper on the ceiling. So when we talk about the wallpaper, it is on the ceiling in this case. So all of the gashes are on the ceiling because it's wallpapered.
Yeah, and so this is just now you have a longer weapon that is striking the ceiling as, the offender is swinging the axe.
Okay, here's the thing. The murder weapon is found on the ground floor with the first two girls. Do you want to go back? But when we do that, we have to talk about their bodies, but then we have to go back upstairs because we have more people.
Actually, let's just continue walking through the upstairs so I know the extent of the crimes, and then we can get into the details at each location.
Okay. Well, now it gets extremely hard. This has been hard already, but now we're going to go to the kids' room. Upstairs, down the hall from the parents' room, they walk in and there are toys scattered. And then they see the bodies lying on their beds, faces covered, are 11-year-old Herman, one of the boys, 10-year-old Mary Catherine, the one girl, 7-year-old Arthur Boyd, and 5-year-old Paul Vernon Moore. Their small skulls are all crushed. Upswings from the axe slice the ceiling, plaster 8 feet, from the floor. So same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Everybody's dead. And that's the end of our victims. So we've got the 4 more kids in one bedroom. We've got the parents. So you've got 6. And then you've got the 2 little girls who were friends of the one little girl. And they decided to spend the night in the guest room.
And based at least with what you've told me, it sounds the parents were in their bed as if they had gone to bed normally. Mm-hmm. The kids are in their beds. And do they have individual beds? Do they share beds? Do we have any details on that?
It does look like they have individual beds.
Okay. And then the 2 non-family members, the 2 little girls that are downstairs in the guest room, they're also, you think, okay, they're the guests, so now they're sleeping separate from the family. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like this crime occurred after the Moores and the 2 guest girls went to bed.
Yes.
And possibly everybody was asleep when they are being struck with the axe.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it so far. We need to now go back downstairs because we finished with the number of victims we've had. So we have a total of 8, 6 Moores and 2 Stillingers.
Yes.
Okay. So back downstairs with the 2 little girls. So remember, it's 8-year-old Ina and 12-year-old Lena. And they have their faces so badly mutilated that they are unrecognizable. Blood soaks the sheets and pillows, but has not seeped through the mattress. The youngest girl is on her back, and she's on the part of the bed that's next to the wall. Her face has been sliced with the sharp edge of an axe. The older child, so that's 12-year-old Lena, lies across the bed, face down. Her nightgown, this is what I was doing a warning about. Her nightgown is pushed up above her waist. Her underwear is pulled off, and her left leg is bent, exposing her genitals. Okay. One of Lena's feet are hanging off the side of the bed. There is an oil lamp at the foot of the bed that illuminates her exposed body. The lamp's glass chimney has rolled under a dresser on an adjacent wall. In addition to the wax to her head, one of her arms is also wounded. It's raised under her pillow, resting on a pool of blood. On the inside of her left thigh, there is a bloody mark. An old, dull, 4-pound, single-bitted axe is partially wiped clean, and it leans against the wall. And this is why this story is known as the Villisca Axe Murders.
Yeah, so now it's a matter of trying to sequence how the offender went through and killed 8 people inside this house.
And I have photos. Don't forget about photos.
So right now, you've talked about, Lena, who's 12 years old. She is, of the kids in the house, she's the oldest female. Mm-hmm. And of course, you have Sarah, who's upstairs, but there's no indication that there was sexual assault on Sarah. One of the things that I would be looking for with Lena was is there any indication that she had been killed prior to the sexual assault, or did the sexual assault occur first? Right now, with Ina laying on the bed dead and Lena on top of her, but kind of sideways, my suspicion is that the two girls were very possibly killed. The family was then killed upstairs, and the offender came back and sexually assaulted Lena, moved her from her sleeping position into a position to accomplish these sex acts. And that's why the axe is in that room. That's the last location. He's already done killing everybody in the house. So he's leaving the axe in the guest bedroom while he sexually assaults Lena and walks out. Right now, that's my working theory without taking a look at any of the photos.
Would you have to know the layout of this house, or does this seem like a crime of opportunity, or is this someone who has been stalking this family or a member of the family or anything like that who would need to know the layout of the house?
The big variable is the family being awake versus being asleep. And right now, I would offer up that I believe that everybody is asleep inside the house. So this affords an offender who can move through the house to learn its layout and determine where everybody is at, and be what we'd consider, like a cat burglar, can silently move through the house and then plot out, how to go about to kill everybody in the house. So that's where it's going to be hard under those circumstances to say that this offender had prior knowledge of the layout of the house. Now, the aspects of the crime and the unusual aspects of the crime are, the Moors, they're all covered up. So the adults are covered up, the kids are covered up. Were Ina and Lena's heads covered up?
No. So
okay,
it doesn't sound like it. Well, now remember that Lena, the 12-year-old, was face down.
Right.
It sounds like that Ina was face up, but I don't see anything about it being covered. Could be. I just don't see it in this research.
Yeah. Okay. So the non-family members are not covered, and all the Moors are covered. So there's a difference between these victims in the offender's mind. Now, you've also mentioned that the offender has all the shades are drawn. The front door, the windows to the front door, have a black skirt over them. All the mirrors in the house have been covered. Right now, this is something the offender isn't doing. Anytime you see an offender do something that is not necessary for committing the crime or the escape, the mirrors are nothing, right? There's nothing about the mirrors that are a threat to the offender. He doesn't want to see him or herself. Now, with Lena being sexually assaulted, that suggests that the offender is a male. I don't know if they identified semen. That would be conclusive to say it's a male. But we know that it's very, very unusual in a violent crime like this for a female to sexually assault a female. So right now, I would say it's strongly looking like, chances are the offender is male. But why is he covering the mirrors? That is significant because it's something we can't necessarily know conclusively because it's internal to the offender. But he doesn't want to see himself in the mirror, and so is he going through the house before he kills the family and covering up the mirrors, or does he do this afterwards? But most certainly, he's taking the time to prevent visibility from outsiders, looking into the house. And then the covering up the Moors versus Ina and Lena, the two non-family members. He sounds like he's closely associated with the Moors. And then the neighbors were somebody that he wasn't as closely attached to.
One interesting note I was just reading about, according to, a website, which is Murder House, which is, dedicated to the Villisca murders. They say that this was actually the sewing room where Lena and Ina were, and they just kind of converted it on the fly to a guest room and put a twin bed down there so they could spend the night.
Sure.
So this was not a normal room. Also, there's a note that this was Josiah's axe. So this was not something that was brought. It was found there. And I still don't understand people who do that, who just discover it's like, let's just see what they have and I'll use whatever they have there.
But the use of a weapon inside the victim's house, whether it be an axe, whether it be a baseball bat, a knife out of the kitchen drawer, drapery cordage, from inside the house, that is a very, very common thing.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Now we're essentially done, I think, talking about the scene until we get a little bit more information. Now the town of Villisca learns all about this, and of course it's devastating. By about 8:40 that morning, the officials tell everybody in town about this. Crowds are starting to form, and just before 9 o'clock, we've got some doctors who arrive, as well as a reverend who is a Presbyterian minister, as well as a reverend who is the Moors Presbyterian minister. So all these people show up, and they're kind of surrounding the house. So just as a reminder, the woman who sounded the alarm on this to begin with, that was about an hour and 10 minutes before. Let me double check and see.
Yeah. 7:30 is what you said.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty wild because you've got 7:30, Mary Peckham says something's wrong. 8:15, Ross, the cousin or the relative, arrives. 8:30, the marshal of Villisca shows up, Hank, and now it is 8:40 and the town knows. So that's pretty fast. I mean, it's good because I'm sure people needed to be alerted that there's an axe murderer out there somewhere, but this is probably not going to be great for the crime scene, I have to assume.
No, hopefully they're kept outside of the crime scene, but then there's a reason we use barrier tape, crime scene tape, and we want to make the crime scene as big as possible because oftentimes we'll find evidence, 2-3 houses away, from shoe impressions or, of course, with shootings, we could potentially have firearms evidence. And the last thing we want are crowds gathering where that evidence is at. And then in this day and age, the one thing that can keep the press away is a crime scene barrier. Press cannot cross crime scene barriers. So if we want to prevent the cameras from, capturing and broadcasting aspects of the crime, either for sensitivity to the victims or for details that somebody could use, when they see it on TV, that's what we do is we set up the crime scene tape. But in 1912 in Villisca, chances are they've probably got a crowd milling about in the yard of this house, and there could be critical evidence that is being trampled on.
Yep. You're right. Why don't we look at some photos real quick before I forget? And I'm just going to kind of shoot them to you all at once. So look at the file I sent you. And we can talk about the first 4 and then stop once you see a dapper looking guy in a chair. Don't go there. Let's start at the top.
So this first photo, it's very artistic actually, is on the left side, it's black and white. On the left side is a long-handled axe that is, the axe head is resting, I'm assuming like, let's say on a tabletop, and then it's being held upright by, a cord that is tied around the end of the handle and is probably secured, at some point higher up. And so this axe, the axe head itself is, this is just a standard, I can't, I don't know the names of the different types of axes, but this is just a standard axe head. It has a blunt end. And then I would say that the sharp working edge is, maybe, I'm guessing because there's no scale, but probably roughly 3 to 4 inches long. And then along the handle, I can see dark staining, which I'm presuming is probably blood staining. I see, a couple of spots that potentially could look like, bloody, the tip of the finger pads touching this axe handle. Unfortunately, I can't see. Well, it does look like there may be some blood spatter closer to the axe head, as well as large, saturated area of blood up towards the head. But the head is so dark, I can't make out any type of staining on it. And it's not like a brand new axe. This axe has been used. The working edge, the sharp edge, looks like it's got gouges in it, so this is an axe that has, somebody didn't just pick it up from a hardware store.
Well, and
like you said,
and this is much longer than I would have thought. I mean, I used axes at my dad's house. This would be good for chopping wood. I'm used to, I guess, hatchets, but this seems unwieldy to me. And now I know how easily it was to hit the ceiling in a, in a room that's only got 7-foot high ceilings.
No, and that's just part of doing like a crime scene reconstruction, is taking a look at the physical space. If somebody's swinging a baseball bat or swinging an axe of this length, there's only so many ways that you can do it and be effective in terms of generating the energy. And so this offender is, at least for some of the blows, is swinging the axe, probably directly overhead, like if you were chopping wood, and is striking the ceiling and putting the defects in the ceiling.
Okay.
And then next to the axe on this table, the lamp, that was probably present, maybe illuminating Lena's, lower body. Then the next photograph.
So you're looking at the mirror that's covered. If you look on the right-hand side.
Okay, so it appears that there's a set of drawers that has a mirror on top of it, and it looks like there's something akin to a drape, or I don't know, like a trench jacket or something that
maybe a curtain. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, but that, like I mentioned before, that is a very significant behavior. The offender is not wanting to see himself in the mirror, and my, off the top of my head, I'm thinking as he's walking around, maybe he's already committed the crime and he's thinking, oh, you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to have to just keep reminding himself of what a piece of shit he is.
Man, you don't use the word shit lightly on this show. So you really must want to emphasize that. Yep.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, he's killed, 8, including 6 kids. This is, so, I mean, you don't get worse than that.
And then the houses, check out the house. It's 2 different, angles.
Yeah. So these, 2 different vantage points of the house. It's a very simple, modest looking house. I'm looking, the first picture is from the front. It appears there's a front porch and the front door, and then obviously there's a room to the right with a window. But that part of the house is just single story. And then to the left, which I'm assuming is where like the guest bedroom and then the upstairs bedrooms are, is showing the 2-story house. The shades are drawn. At least in the windows that I can see on the left side, including the upstairs windows, shades. Now, did the offender do that, or is that just, when the Moors go to bed, they draw the shades? So that would be part of the interview process to determine what the victimologies, the victim's habits are. And then the other elevation. Photograph of the other elevation of the house is more from the front left of the house, and now you can see downstairs along the side of the left side of the house, there's also 2 other windows, and it doesn't appear that there's any visibility into the house through those windows.
Now you see the markings, because I thought this was interesting. If you can see that they're marking where these rooms are. So the master is upper left. It looks like at the back of the house. The main room, the main bedroom is upper left, I think, where you see the little 1. And then number 2 is where the Lena and Ina were, down below. And then it looks like number 3 is where the kind of interesting shaped windows are facing the street. And that's where the kids are.
Sure. And I would say, in terms of the sequence, let's say the offender, because I think the Moors, because of them being covered,
Mm-hmm.
I think the Moors were the primary target at that, and the offender has some sort of connection to them, and may have been completely oblivious to Ina and Lena being in that downstairs back bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until he goes up and kills the Moore family and comes down, and he's going through the house trying to, set up, the shades and the coverings of the mirrors and stuff. He discovers Ina and Lena still asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And now he kills them and he sexually assaults Lena and then ends up eventually, leaving the house. So instead of killing them because they're on the first floor, he kills Ina and Lena first, running across them, wandering around the first floor, and then goes up and kills the Moors. That's one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But the other possibility, the reverse, is also possible.
Well, let's go through who shows up to this house and what their specialties are. We've got 4 doctors who are coming.
Okay.
We also have the Presbyterian minister I mentioned. And so everybody's there. And the doctors are searching around and they find bloody, long underwear under the bed of the guest room downstairs where Lena and Ina are. It had been used hastily to wipe the murder weapon and the killer's hands clean. I don't know how they would have known that, but, that's what they say. There are still traces of blood and hair on the axe's handle. And next to the axe, they discover a hunk of bacon weighing 4 pounds and measuring 6 by 12 inches. It is wrapped in a flour sack or a cheesecloth. And I have more details about food in the kitchen.
Okay, now this long underwear, did they determine, was that foreign to the house, or is that just something that the offender accessed from a closet or a drawer?
I think he grabbed it.
Okay, so he's just using that as a cleanup towel.
I believe so, yeah.
Which, in this day and age with modern forensics, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
We potentially could get his DNA just from him using that in that manner. Yeah, I'm not sure what to make about this hunk of bacon. So it sounds like that there's other disturbances to food in the kitchen. So let's hear about that.
All right. Let's move on to the kitchen, as you said. In the kitchen, there is food neatly laid out on the table. A bowl of bloody water suggests that the killer had washed himself before exiting the house. So in the ice box on the kitchen floor, which is where they kept their items that needed to be cold, is another slab of bacon. So it sounded to me, I don't know if you agree with this or not, like this was not their meal, the Moore's meal, because they were already in bed. And there's no way Mrs. Moore would have left out perfectly good food laying around, especially bacon. So he did it? Is that what you would think?
Yeah, this also could explain why all the external windows to the house are covered. Mm-hmm. Is he spending time after he's killed the victims, and is, the practical aspect is he's hungry. Mm-hmm. And so now he's eating their food. He's cleaning up. And he doesn't, he may, there's one oil lamp on when the victims are discovered in the guest room, but he may have had another oil lamp on so he could see what he's doing in the kitchen, in order to be able to eat. And he doesn't want, people on the outside, neighbors, to see in the middle of the night there's a light on inside, the Moore's house, because that would be suspicious. Mm-hmm. So that's maybe why he's going through and covering up the external. Still behaviorally, I think there's a practical aspect that's now starting to come to light about why the windows, the shades are closed, and the windows to the door have been covered with the black skirt. That could be practical, But then the covering of the mirrors, the covering of the Moore's heads, that's a behavioral thing. That's an act he's doing that is unnecessary for the commission of the crime, or definitely for him lingering in the house in order to possibly just eat. I'd be interested to see how this food was neatly laid out on the table. Is there something odd about it? Or is it just he's just kind of laying it out and eating and leaving it like that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is the bacon in the guest room by the axe? Does he grab this bacon like he's going to, leave the house with it and decides against it? Who knows?
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll get more information about that in a little bit. We have speculation, and I think it is really interesting speculation. So you tell me what you think about these doctors from 1912 who are coming up with some stuff. This is not controversial. Rigor mortis, they think based on that and the visual inspection of how the blood had coagulated, they're guessing that they were murdered around midnight, which is, 8 to 9 hours ago. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, they went to sleep and then, the killer had as many hours as he wanted, essentially. So the contaminated crime scene, yes, we have one. 100 people showed up, of course, because they made the announcement. Be careful, there's an axe murderer out there. They take tours of the house while this investigation's going on. They pull down the window blinds. They break the chimney of one of the oil lamps that's in the house. They carry the axe from room to room, and someone actually stole a piece of Josiah's skull, which was about the size of a cigarette package. Who the hell secured this crime scene? I guess it is that an experienced marshal flipping Hank. I mean, this is awful.
No, it's, this crime scene is so contaminated that it's possible that any evidence that could have been left by the offender to identify the offender, even with modern technology, could have been just completely lost. It's abhorrent in terms of how this crime scene is being treated. And it's abhorrent how these victims are being exposed to the public.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. By 10:30, so this is 3 hours after Mary Peckham makes the discovery. By 10:30 a.m., the crowd outside is so big that they call in the National Guard to secure the crime scene. I mean, now you know why this case has been talked about for more than 100 years. I mean, this was traumatizing and titillating to everyone in this area when this happened. 8 people in one house, 6 little kids, a potential sexual assault. I mean, all of this was pretty horrific. Luckily, the doctors plow their way through all of this. And we have the county coroner who's there. And he says that there's a water basin on the back porch where it should be in the kitchen. And it's got dirty water in it, not regular water. So there's the speculation that I think is interesting. They go to the barn, and the coroner says there is a depression in some of the hay bales, and he finds a 2-inch knot hole. So he's pretty sure that this guy hid behind bay bales and, made a little hole for him to be able to watch to see when families came home. And I'll tell you about their timeline also. But that's what he thinks happened. And then what I think is he washed his hands maybe before all of this happened. And that's why there's dirty water outside. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the offender lying in wait, that adds up to me. He may have found a moment where he could sneak into this barn, and it may have been much earlier in the day. Mm-hmm. And this is where he's waiting for a long period of time. And eventually he goes into the house, let's say it's around midnight or 2 a.m., whenever, and kills the victims. Now he's hungry. Mm-hmm. This is I saw this with Golden State Killer. After he would sexually assault some of his victims, he would raid their refrigerator and grab food and Coors Light and go out on the back porch and hang out there. And, there's a component for that type of predator, this is power and control, mm-hmm. Exerting power and control over the victim's domain. But there's a practical aspect. If you're out prowling all night, you get hungry. And now, once you've kind of gotten through the excitement of the type of crime you've wanted to commit, you are, going, well, there's food here. I'm going to eat some of the food. Yeah. I think that's what's going on with this offender. He's lying in wait and potentially lied in wait for a long period of time, goes in and kills the family, and now he eats.
Well, let's talk about their timeline, because maybe that'll give you some clues on who might have done this, whether this was opportunity or he was stalking them actively or whatever. So you'll remember the day before was a Sunday. The Moores were very religious. So Josiah ran a successful franchise of the John Deere Plow Company. John Deere was around back then.
Mhm.
Sarah was really heavily involved in the Presbyterian church where the minister came from. The day before, they spent the day attending an 11 a.m. service at the church. And they were also getting ready for the church's annual Children's Day program. They were socializing with family. So 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., Sarah and the minister's wife and other women churchgoers led the rehearsal for this program I told you about with kids. They were celebrating the final day of Sunday school. 4:30 comes and the Moore family visited Josiah's parents. They go back to church at 7:30 that night. There's an 8 o'clock program with the singing that we were talking about. And over the course of the next hour, the children are doing skits and all kinds of stuff and reciting Bible passages. At the end of the evening, the parents and children have milk and cookies. Sounds like a really great day for the Moores. And earlier in the day, they had allowed Catherine's friends, Lena and Ina, to spend the night. So, they just said, can this happen? And they said, sure. The mother was 7 months pregnant. So Lena and Ina's mother was 7 months pregnant. And she was going to go and stay, but she wasn't going to be able to. She didn't feel like it. The girls were nervous to walk over a mile from the church to their grandmother's house in the dark. And that's why they decided to try to spend the night at the friend's house, which was closer. They were only 3 blocks away from the church. So, final part of this timeline. Between 9:45 p.m. and 10 p.m., everybody goes home. So the church is 3 blocks from the Moore's house, and the 8 of these people walk, over into including the 2 little girls who weren't meant to be there at all. And that's the timeline. Lots of church. So what do you think about that? It would be easy for a stranger to kind of target them?
Well, I think what strikes me is that basically everybody is away from the house all of Sunday until they come home roughly 10 o'clock at night, right?
Yeah, it looks like starting their first thing, I think, was an 11 a.m. church service 3 blocks away from the house.
So, this is where the offender lying in wait in the barn, I mean, he could have, wandered onto this property. Mm-hmm. He has to worry about, other witnesses like Mary across the street. But he doesn't have to worry about anybody inside the house seeing him because nobody's home. So why does he wait in the barn versus going inside the house itself? So he's purposely making a decision, and then I think what's popping into my head right now is, okay, how is he getting into the house while the family's asleep? But did they routinely lock the door, or did they just leave the door unlocked, which 1912 in this type of town, chances are the door was unlocked. Yep. That's my guess. Yep. Okay. So.
Oh, you know what? No. I just went back and looked. Ross Moore, the relative, got into the house using a key. Now, we don't know if the offender locked the doors after he left, but I mean, it sounds like they were trying all the doors. So I don't know. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, it also is, if let's say all the doors are locked when Ross is trying to get in, how does the offender lock the door behind him? And that's dependent upon the locking mechanism. But if the offender, does he take a family member's key, like Josiah's key ring, and then now is able to, lock the door on his way out? Mm-hmm. That's a possibility. Mm-hmm. And so I'd be looking for, any sets of missing keys that would indicate that the offender did that. The offender is lying in wait in the barn versus inside the house. I think a possible reason for that is he doesn't want to confront the family while they're still awake. He wants to ensure that they are asleep. And this house is not a very big house. So, he probably could very easily be discovered if he waited inside the house. So he is deciding, okay, I want to wait, and I need to wait long enough to ensure that this family is asleep. The family doesn't come home until 10 o'clock at night. And then I imagine with the young kids, they're going to bed right away. The parents are probably going to bed. And he waits long enough where he's assured that, he's not going to be confronted by, let's say, Josiah, because Josiah is still awake. And so that I think is significant from a kind of like, well, who is this offender? He doesn't have the self-confidence to confront this family while they're awake. He basically wants to ambush them while they're asleep. That's very much a cowardly type of act, but it's also a very practical one, especially when you have 6 kids that you have to kind of, manage in addition to the 2 adults as victims.
Okay. The county attorney shows up by 8:30 that night, and he brings a pair of bloodhounds. This is what the bloodhounds do. They sniff the axe handle. They pull investigators upstairs to the main bedroom. They go back down the stairs. They go across the front lawn. They go down the street. They stop in front of somebody's house. The guy's name is Frank Fernando Jones, and he is a wealthy man in town. And he is involved in this case. He's known to the Moors, which, everybody probably is in this town. They go toward the Nottoway, it sounds like Nottoway River, which is about a mile south of Villisca. And there is a mob of 2,000 people. These keep getting bigger and bigger. They have guns and clubs and pitchforks and axes, getting ready to beat the living shit out of whoever these dogs point to and say he's the one who did it. And at the river, they lose the scent. This is scary. This is like mob mentality for sure. Amazing.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, but, dogs are amazing. Of course, bloodhounds are amazing in terms of, what they're able to, smell and how they can track. This is such a contaminated crime scene. You're now losing, of course, the offender has touched the axe handle. And this is I've had this in a case with a baseball bat, bludgeoning with a baseball bat and the dogs, sent it off of, the baseball, basically a swath of cloth that had gone across the handle of this bat. And then they start, doing their scent trail. And this was a pristine crime scene, but it's kind of hard to say, are they truly on the offender's track itself? And that's my concern here, especially with such a contaminated crime scene.
Well, speaking of contaminated crime scenes, I think the FBI is pretty pissed off when they show up with a fingerprint expert. And the guy says, what am I supposed to do? There have been hundreds of people who have, gone through this house. Yep. Technically, it was the Bureau of Investigation in 1912. But the special agent is irritated. He came from Leavenworth, Kansas. And there's very little he's going to be able to do at that point. And that's just what's heartbreaking about a lot of the cases that you and I talk about is not knowing any better. And this probably still happens with people who are inexperienced. I'm not even going to say in small towns, just in general, but to ruin a crime scene by allowing people to come in and take mementos is just horrific. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's how you don't do it. That's,
So this is the thing about this case. It, like other serial killer cases, creates hysteria over a serial killer that, of course, we haven't named a serial killer for 60 years. That's not the phrase that they use. I guess they would say multiple murderer is what I've always used for the 1800s. So there is terror. Villisca becomes a sundown town. Do you remember that phrase? I just talked to you about it, I think a month or two ago. Sundown town.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I do listen to you, Kate. I really do.
It's not a town that enjoys sunsets. That's it. Okay. So a sundown town is where basically any ne'er-do-well known in that time, including people of color, needed to be very concerned about being caught after dark in a town like this. And that's what happens. There is a string of brutal slayings in other places over the last 9 months. So 16 other people have been similarly murdered in your neck of the woods, Colorado, Illinois, and Kansas. So people think that there is a serial killer out there called Billy the Axeman. I don't know where that came from. Or the Midwest Axeman. And I can go through these murders. And to me, I mean, axe murderers were not that unusual, even in the early 1900s. But, they list them off. I can tell you about them. Colorado Springs, Paul.
No, really?
Yeah.
Oh, is it still unsolved? Maybe I need to dig into it then,
I think it is, actually.
Well, I think, right now, sure, you have other far-reaching jurisdictions that have similar type crimes, but it has to be more than just the use of an axe. It has to be more than just somebody breaking into a family's house and killing people, or even multiple people, because this was something that was more common back in the day. It's the signatures, the unusual things that the offender did inside the Moore's house that I would want to see. Is there any other similar unusual things happening in Colorado Springs, in Illinois, such as the covering of the mirrors, which is the most significant, or the covering of the victims' heads? Do they share that type of behavior? Then I would go, okay, I'm interested to see, are they related or not?
Okay. I'm going to tell you about the 4 that are less interesting to me. Actually, it is a total of 4. 3 are not that interesting. 1 is really interesting to me. So you tell me. Okay. And I'll go out of order. The first one, though, is in Colorado Springs. It's a couple and their 3-year-old who was murdered. And same night, next door neighbor and 2 kids were also murdered with an axe. These are all axe murders. Okay.
And when did this happen?
September 20th, 1911. So this is about 9 months before.
Okay. So 2 families killed right next to each other.
Yes.
Okay.
The next one is October 1st. So about 11, 12 days later in Monmouth, Illinois. There's a couple and their 13-year-old daughter who are killed. The girl's nightgown was torn. One of her arms was stretched overhead, kind of like Lena, and the girl's legs were pushed up to expose her body, just like Lena.
Okay.
Okay. Third set comes October 16th. So that is about 2 weeks later. This is in Ellsworth, Kansas. We're getting closer to where we're going, to, Villisca. A couple and their 3 children were murdered. The kids were 6, 4, and 1. The mother was sexually assaulted with 2. Man, this should be a whole warning just for this. She was sexually assaulted. 2 toy pistols were forced into her rectum. A lamp was left at the foot of the bed with its chimney found under a chair. And it doesn't say whether the lamp was on or not, but you'll remember that's kind of the way it was set up for Lena also, like putting her on display. And then the murderer crudely cleaned that axe.
Okay.
Last one, no kids in the home. This is 140 miles south of Villisca, the closest one. This is the same year as the murders in Paola, Kansas. It's a couple who was bludgeoned to death with a coal pick or a mason's hammer. And as I said, no kids in the house. Oh, let me do the connective tissue part of this too, Paul. In all these murders, every one of them, the faces of the victims had been covered by sheets. The blinds were drawn or blacked out with garments. And in 3 of the murders, the killer washed himself at the scene of the crime. At least 5 of the murders, he had lingered. They never found fingerprints. Now, I know what you're going to ask. I don't see anything about the mirrors, but blinds were drawn in these. What do you think in all of those?
No, I have to admit, those sound interesting enough to where I have to consider the possibility that could be the same offender that killed the Moores and Ina and Lena. And so if that's the case, obviously he's mobile. He's moving from state to state to state, and he's, committing this type of crime. I think it's compelling with, the one case that was in Illinois.
The mom or the girl? 13-year-old girl or the mom?
With the 13-year-old girl.
Yeah, Illinois.
And then the one that was in Ellsworth, where you have the two pistols that have been shoved into an orifice. That is I do see predators doing that. That is something that they experiment with. So yeah, I would say, with even as little details as you provided on those cases, I'd be highly interested in taking a closer look to see, is there even more overlap than just what you provided?
Well, let me play devil's advocate and you tell me what you think, because I was thinking about this, the connective tissue part of it. So in all of these murders, the victims' faces were covered by sheets. Is that unusual? Even if they don't know the person, is it unusual to find a victim that has a covered face?
I can go back to multiple cases, including the Golden State Killer, where D'Angelo covered multiple victims with the bedding, after he bludgeoned them. And there is a practical aspect, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, about the spatter guard aspect. And so that's part of what I would be assessing.
Okay.
But it's also an offender who doesn't want to be looking at what he did. Now, typically when we see victims covered, that's kind of going back to, okay, in the offender's mind, there's some sort of attachment to those victims. But it's not hard and fast. And, the fact that in these cases with, an axe being used or a bludgeoning weapon being used, and you're seeing whole families being killed, just like in the Moore case, the Valeska case, there is some aspect to it to where you have a similar psychology between the offender that committed these other state crimes and the one that killed the Moores and Ina and Lena. So that's, for me, I'm now fascinated with looking at this as a series versus, I would use the term a mass murder with the Moore case, the Valeska case being a standalone case with 8 people being killed all at once. I would say that's a mass murder and not a serial killer.
Well, the sheriff of Colorado Springs agrees with you. They pulled this together very quickly. So they're discovered on, I don't even remember what day it is, June 10th. So this happened, let's say, 11:59 p.m., June 9th. This is almost like a task force that they're pulling together June 12th. So the sheriff from Colorado Springs meets with sheriffs from Illinois and from, I think it's Kansas also. And they have a discussion and they're trying to decide who they think this guy is. The guy from Colorado Springs, that sheriff, says he thinks it's a religious fanatic. And it's one person that is just ripping through the Midwest, sexually assaulting and killing people. And the sheriff from Illinois does not agree. He says, we think these are separate people. And he convinces the other sheriffs that these need to be investigated separately, not as a series of murders. What do you think about that?
Well, this is, when you do have, let's say, similar crimes, and you're trying to determine, are they related or not? Without, that objective DNA or fingerprint evidence or something that is really, really unusual that you can say, hey, for sure, these are related. This is where it's nebulous. And you're making an educated guess based on your own experience and expertise as to, are the cases more likely to be related or not? The mistake that agencies often make is they choose one path and not the other as the way that they conduct their investigation.
Mhm.
And so for these cases, I would say you have to consider that they're related, and you need to dedicate investigative resources to march down that road. But then you also have to, pursue each case individually, doing traditional, standalone case type of investigations. So you have to keep both things going until it clarifies, oh, they're all related, or oh, no, they're not. It's interesting that, the Colorado Springs Sheriff, which today it's El Paso County Sheriff, and you have Colorado Springs PD. So it sounds like El Paso County Sheriff controlled all of Colorado Springs. He's saying the offender is a religious fanatic. And so while we know about the Moors being highly religious, the victimology in these other cases would also now need to be studied to indicate, were they also very religious? Had they all also attended, let's say, church the day of that they're killed? Is this guy a semi-transient religious individual that kind of just shows up at these various, let's say, religious spots, and then chooses a family that he's going to go and then kill for whatever reason?
Yep.
Right? And we know with Lena, in that case, there's a sexual component to his crime.
Well, they go through suspects and eliminate everyone they had. I guess, let me see. It sounds like Josiah and Mary's estranged brother-in-laws were dismissed. There was a weird Bulgarian salesman. I don't know where this comes from. He was dismissed. There is an escaped patient. He was found beforehand. It sounds like all of this happened. And there was a construction worker who liked to sleep with an axe. Never did anything else with it, though. He was dismissed. He was 40 miles away, confirmed alibi. So they are at a dead end. And the investigation comes to a crawl until they manage to gather 3 main suspects. Okay. We are going to have to talk in the next episode about these trio of very eccentric, I think, suspects. One is a convicted killer. One is a wealthy businessman. And one is a minister.
Okay.
So we're going to go over them next week.
Well, you're going to leave me hanging.
I am, as always.
I will wait patiently.
All right. I'll see you in a week.
All right, Kate. Take care.
Bye.